Great. Welcome to our Walter Rodney seminar. This is our last Walter Rodney seminar of the 25-26 school year. Today, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Gerald Rizzo, presenting the placement of history, moving the eyes in lines and layers. Without further ado, I'm also going to turn it to myself again to read over the bio. Perfect. Gerald J. Rizzo, M.D., Dr. Gerald J. Rizzo, president of Afriterra Foundation, earned degrees in chemistry from the University of Florida and Doctor of Medicine at the University of Alabama, later serving 4 decades as medical director of Fresenius Dialysis Center in the Tampa Bay area. Always holding a deep interest in geography, he founded the groundbreaking Afriterra Cartographic Library on Beacon Hill in 1990. The philanthropic mission stands to preserve and access a rich cartographic archives focused on Africa, enabling broader interpretation and transformative education. So right now, we will be passing it over to Dr. Rizzo to start.
Okay, well, thank you. I first want to express my appreciation to Professor Thornton for anchoring this topic in the 1998 William and Mary Quarterly, and his years in the field and the archives of Rome, Florence, and beyond. Nowadays, the merging of STEM plus a grounding in humanities gives the steam to fuel a philanthropic pedagogic purpose. I am not a historian. I'm just a compiler of expensive dust. That's expansive and expensive dust, sweeping centuries of scatter into one pile that is accessible, the particles of which have continuously formed and reformed the world's view of Africa. Boston University's multidisciplinary culture is an ideal house to examine such a 500-year record. Today, we can emphasize the imperative of placement in 2 parts: the graphic case of Angola and the basis in neuroscience. Life occurs in paths. As such, history demands a way to propel our eyes across the barriers of time and space to retrieve the untold presence of Africa, a continent now with the largest proportion of youth and truly momentous migrations, past and present. Here, our case introduces the texture of a cartographic library focused on Africa to serve as a lesson companion. UNESCO in 2016 emphasized Sustainable Development Goal 4, where education is a human right for all throughout life, and that access must be matched by bold and innovative action. Our method employs John Dewey as an experiential teacher, where learners discover and occupy different frames of reference. A key thrust for such engagement is geography, the space where all history and cultures unfold. The institutional need is to provide content. The individual's need yearns for a connection. Enter historical cartography, closing distances, contacting the past, and lending an aesthetic experience to learning. Digital access works by gathering the eyes and expanding the immediate senses. Indeed, the sense of connection begins with awareness. We read of this middle passage as an event, but we see it as a very deep place. We speak of Angola in words, but this is a place of events. So we begin with this modern satellite map of Angola. And we have to point out first the landmarks to orient ourselves. And we see Luanda with Barrier Island forts. There's 2 forts at the Barrier Island. At the coast, very near the mouth of the Kwanza River, which also has a fort. And the Kwanza River is also spelled with a K, a C, or a Q. And then I outlined in boulder the Kwanza River as it descends from the highlands in the east, and also the Lukala River as it meets at the junction of Kwanza and Lukala rivers at Fort Masangano, which is 100 kilometers inland. Fort Masangano was established in 1583, and it stands as the longest and most active inland slave depot in all of sub-Saharan Africa. The orientation of Dongo is within the triangle of the Lukala River and the Kwanza River, centered approximately 15 degrees east longitude. And so most of our maps will try to pinpoint the toponyms that designate the Kingdom of Dongo within this small area. The Mabundu Society, speaking Kimbundu language, endured a long and ambivalent relationship with Portugal in various economic, religious, military pursuits, dating back to the 1400s. Many battles and agreements produced advantages for both agents until Paulo Dias Novaes in 1576 established the coastal port of Luanda Paul, near the mouth of the Kwanza River. It would become the busiest continuous chattel depot ever recorded and thoroughly documented in the transatlantic slave voyage database, logging over 5 million captives, nearly half of the entire Atlantic slave trade. During a span of 300 years, the demand from Sao Tome and Brazil quickly expanded to the entire Caribbean and beyond. In 1619, there were 36 vessels embarking from Luanda when a pirated vessel, the White Lion, was intercepted a Portuguese vessel, Batista, which was sailing from Luanda. They bound the captives into their own hulls after a great portion had perished, yet delivered 20 and odd slaves remanded to the shore of Point Comfort, Jamestown, Virginia colony, marking the advent of a 400-year legacy in the development of North America, and finally, in 2019, acknowledged around the world. Yet recognition has often evaded the where. From where exactly did the 20 and odd souls reside? Placement is a formative piece of the 1619 story, but there is so much more in the station and position of such a noble name. If we want to make the world a better place, we have to think about the world as a place. That was a mandate given at MIT in 2016. As with other imperatives, this demand launches a necessary pursuit. Placement, reclaimed by any and all digital means to bring that space into proximity. Our study applies such a method, locating the geographic imprint of Dongo in each fully magnified field of 100 original engravings. The sample size being a preponderance of evidence available during a time frame of 100 years before and after 1619. Here we identify a spatial alignment in the earliest manuscript. Then we georeferenced a contemporary Dutch map using known satellite pins matching durable landmarks at the coast and 5 interior forts at precise archaeologic coordinates. This illustrative case springs from one word, Dongo, buried within the noted historical texts, but now realized as an actual inhabited place. Here, in the earliest manuscript, drawn by a Capuchin missionary on site in 1645, as preserved in the archive of Propaganda Vita in Rome. Rarely, if ever, seen in public. This asks us to pause here for a moment of reflection as we come upon the recorded presence of Dongo occupying this space. So allow your eyes to take you there. The function of toponyms begins with awareness. The kingdom of Dongo existed as countless Marindas or mobile clusters, but a global awareness lagged a generation behind the original linguistic accounts. Yet these 7 identifiable toponyms begin to circulate on maps found from 1591 to 1690, tabulated here in these proportions. Now, this tabulated list does not mean much as you see it in vertical list. We begin to find meaning by the other function of toponyms is a sense of not only awareness, but where-ness. And so the toponyms develop more meaning simply by displaying them in their locations, either coastal or interior, from west to east. So the place names of the Portuguese forts are diagrammed here are in red, and then the place names for the concentrated villages of Dongo are in the middle inland, and then the more remote expansions of Dongo are to the further east. This can be displayed where we create this triangular arc. And from the coast of Luanda, we had said that Fort Masangano is 100 kilometers inland at the junction of the Lucala, which we draw the arc as the northern branch of the triangle, and the continued Kwanzaa to the floodplain East Highlands and it forms this triangular arc averaged at about 15 degrees east longitude, where most of the place names and the records of Dongo are located within this arc as it travels east. We've uploaded links to the original exemplary maps that plot the location of the 7 place names signifying the Kingdom of Dongo that can be found on our website on the education, bottom of the education page, along with the transcript of this talk. Filippo Pigafetta was the first to publish in 1591 a multilingual rendition noted by envoy Duarte Lopez. And what I'll point here, this is the famous map, the earliest map of the Congo, but we zoomed in on the Kwanza River. And I'd want to point out on this map just 3 of the landmarks, which we're going to expand on and discuss further through the hour. One is on the Kwanza River in Gaza, which is given an icon as a city or a town or a village or a more concentrated cluster as Ngaza. Now, Ngaza is a toponym that only appeared on the maps. It appeared on 45% of the maps in that 100 years, but we or Dr. Thornton could never find Ngaza in a text. There are other names, Gaza and Ngaza and Mbaka, but we don't know if Gaza was just the cartographer's interpretation of a name or whether it really is Kabasa, which is the main capital, but it was only a capital because the ruler was associated there. And the estimates have varied on the population of Kabasa, but whether we could ever determine whether Ngaza and Kabasa are the same, I don't know. They're probably 2 similarly located places. The other toponym that is of note is Mons Quema, where we opened with the gigantic 200-foot, 1 million year old boulder cluster, which are the black rocks that in Portuguese is Mons Quema, were well pointed out in these maps, but only in 2% was that rock garrison. And then this most prominent lake, Aqualunda, appeared in 75% of the maps. And the lake has been debated because it doesn't actually exist. Is it a myth or is it something real? And we hope to present some pretty convincing evidence that Lake Aqualunda does exist as the floodplain of the Kwanza River. In 1645, Johan Janssen, after the Dutch invasion, made this first Dutch map, which we had to rotate, that marked Ngaza and Dongo together. Ngaza at the same basic location as the Portuguese map, and Dongo had to be rotated and inverted, the Dongo Regne, and then, of course, the prominent lake Aqualunda. In 1680, Nicolas Sanson, the noted French cartographer, had marked Ngaza as equal to Donga, also showing Lake Aqualunda as well as Fort Masangano. In 1745, Thomas Astley summarized a century of happenings in Angola by noting that Cabasa, here equated with Dongo, was destroyed by the Portuguese, noting the defeats of 1618 and the defeats of 1671. But also noted in this map are the Isles of Kitanga, which are noted by Astley as being a large garrison of black soldiers, and then the Kwanza and the kingdom of Anazinga or Queen Zinga. which obviously lasted beyond what they thought was destroyed. So we rewrite the diagram and say that Dongo and Gaza, Kabasa, and Mbaka, all four appeared closely within the triangular arc east of the Lucala Junction, within 1 degree of 15 east. However, in the key years from 1618 to 1619, a crucial battle occurred where the people abandoned Kabasa and Gaza as one or both, without a trace. But Mbaka, near the Lucala River, was annexed to become a permanent Portuguese station, added to Fort Masangano, being the primary site where the inland captives were held. So in the diagram, Mbaka remained Portuguese until this very day, and Gaza and Kabasa could never be found or recovered archaeologically. And Dongo then, for the rest of this discussion, is going to remain, we're going to point out Mons Quema, which are the Pungo rocks, Aquilunda, and Matamba is the remaining part of our focus on the easterly defenses. For a measure of distortion of these two important landmarks, Mons Quema and Lake Aquilunda, we employed a georeference software to overlay the Dutch map of 1645 onto the current Google Earth, revealing approximately 1.5 degree distortion in the estimation of time and distance from any dependable supply point at Luanda or Mesangano. So when we stretched and pinned the old map onto Google Earth satellite map and used these four archaeologic sites to pin it, the mathematics could show this distortion that the Mons Quema, the Black Rocks, the fortress of Black Rocks, was about 1.5 degrees distorted to the north, and it actually sits at this location at 14.5 degrees, 14.6 degrees longitude. The similar eastern distortion of Lake Aquilunda was 1.5 degrees further east distorted, where it is actually located, as we'll see, in the floodplain of the Kwanzaa River in this location. Here, the interpretation of the prominent symbolic Lake Aquilunda easily fits certain historical, physical, and linguistic notes. The Kandanga Islands are repeatedly mentioned in historical accounts, noting Queen Zinga's river island cluster of easterly defenses. The hydrology of the Kwanzaa River, with its Lucala tributary, holds a catchment of 146,000 kilometers, descending to their junction, where a laterite plateau flattens, slows, and spreads the sediment in a floodplain of shifting mounds, spongy peat, and marshy vegetation. Leunda is a Latin etymology for a wave or inundation of water, confirmed in later land surveys and satellite maps upstream, delineating the various braids, lagoons, sandbars, marshes, and morass existing in the inland floodplain, approximately 15 degrees longitude, well before 3 hydro dams took advantage of this aquelude. So after the dams were made, these large reservoir lakes formed in otherwise earlier floodplains on those 1800 maps. And then the actual location, satellite location of the Black Rocks is slightly north of that floodplain. Although some maps mark Dongo as destroyed by the Portuguese after defeats in 1671, yet Dongo and Matamba, those locations, were continually present in maps throughout the 1800s along the northeastern Luanda highlands. This particular map is a fairly rare Portuguese map by Lopez Lima from 1846, still indicating that Dongo was considered a kingdom existing in the 1800s. At that point, merged with Matamba. So, for now, for us, as we gaze on the Burnt Rocks Monument, a phenomenal question stands. So I will ask the first question, and then we'll answer it with the second half of this discussion. And that question, phenomenal question, is, why does placement matter? This very act of placement hurls a vector with force and direction. At once, here becomes a capacity, a space to supply context, filled with intersecting paths. Origin, migrations, and encounters spanning 400 years, etched among 4,000 maps, and itemized in 10,000 place names. With a ready tap, every point has surroundings, orbits to take notice of others in history. Each toponym marks the places of African agency, not an abstract interior, but a visually grounded sphere that connects all people to the existence of an Africa that always existed there. So in this second half, whatever questions may be coming to mind are all going to be answered by deep philosophy, whether they be historical questions or technical questions. Everything starts with philosophy and how the world enters our mind and how our mind creates our world. I'll present it in three parts: the internal, the logical, and the external. The 2014 Nobel-Prize honored in neuroscience, honored a discovery that began early in 1654, during the same year that the idea of a faraway place called Angola was ever first etched on a gallery wall by Abraham Ortelius. At that same time, in 1654, the exact same year, the idea of a tiny inner place called the hippocampus was first pinned deep within a thin slice of human brain by Julius Arantes in his anatomy book, De Humane Fetu Liber. Now precisely confirmed in this magnetic resonance scan. It would take many years for us to understand Angola as an actual inhabited place on Earth, but many more years to understand that the hippocampus is the precise location in the human mind where such cognitive abilities form to navigate and realize that greater world. In recent years, several labs devised a method to insert thin wires into exact locations in the brain of animals and humans, and then follow them actively moving on a platform. Now I'm going to have fun with you. It is this electrical clicking that in synchronous bursts within the hippocampus that signals a certain place on the platform without any external clicking. This enabled a record of electrical firing within specific single cells, but surprisingly heard only at the moment of specific locations on the roaming grid. And those cells remain silent when traveling to other locations. After many repetitions, there was convincing evidence that every one of the brains had certain specific place cells and grid cells and head position cells. Paramount to the whole field of history, John O'Keefe saw how space plays a role in all behavior. We move through it, explore it, experience it, and remember it. With a firm basis in the 2014 Nobel Prize for this discovery of place cells, we know tracing is deeply natural. The observation of terrain becomes a biologic placement directly into the temporal lobe of any curious mind. The basis in philosophy. A map is plainly defined where three variables come together: a reality, a representation, and the gaze of a user. It's the multitude of users now that shape our world. In the philosophy of symbolic forms, Ernst Cassirer states, what we call the world is not given as self-evident from the outset. It is apprehended in an ongoing crisis of spatial consciousness. Our approach opens an assemblage, a thorough identification of cartographic elements that furnish space and time, now digitally rendered in a resortable, reusable visual parade. The ontology is more than a logical picturing relation, but rather a language game, following certain practice of rules or methods of use, where the meaning will vary with the use as the key. A map is a gesture. It actively points to a space, focusing attention on a state of affairs. In that way, cartography serves as a performance. It replays what occurs in the human mind as the human mind constructs space in many dimensions. Geometric space gives necessary direction and meaning and distance. Sequential space realizes time in a dynamic flow of events that come to be known as movement or change. But experiential space is internal. It grows from sensory attachments and then molded as we approach, enter, interact, accumulate a further view. By returning, we gain attention, familiarity, verification, understanding, and an intention to reject or join or modify what is there or what is next. This placement opens both physical and social forces as a conscious experience. The conscious mind maps a string of personal experiences known as self, to which we add certain reported experiences. In total, the impact plus repetition of all these experiences forms our very existence. cartography brings in space, opening more experiences to grow the self as a keen absorber of spaces. Unfurling an original chart is to join the eyes of those before. Every inch is a storage of names, an encounter with the other in the wider world that always existed. By accruing diverse spatial visits, cartography opens an easement to other stories and external realities. By accruing diverse spatial visits, it also serves as an instrument to recycle a narrative identity, that's diffusion, moratorium, and achievement, and make over lingering roots of bias with ample support to eclipse an intolerant view. The hippocampus consolidates memory. It allows us to feel the contoured lines of nature. Connecting dots allows a zooming immersion to take hold like tapping into oil reserves. A map holds historical energy, fueling hours of curiosity, what was or is relatable. Here is a platform where any hand can repeatedly refresh a user experience, a UX journey, where diversity is etched in the soil, where a space can be joined, where viewers imagine themselves differently, where fresh fountains of identity flow. While exercising scale, well, first we want to reconcile doubt. Many of our questions come from doubt. We can learn from doubt. To paraphrase Descartes, I doubt, therefore I am. Individuals often doubt their own ability to reckon where they are. Thus, a collective community developed in language and gesture and a variety of indigenous instruments. However, local needs and external forces imposed other arbitrary practices. Yet still, we stand mostly on a world of mathematics, triangulation, trigonometry, and topology. We know doubt is merely an uncertainty with measurable probabilities. We find errors in different proportions, not all or none. Whether intentional or natural, errors can eventually be confirmed, modified, or definitively corrected by further observation, that is, verification. While exercising scale, any leap across time and space, abstractions are intrinsic. So we deconstruct the map to untangle the original emphasis, omissions, motives, and methods. Over centuries, any knot of deception was eclipsed by the burgeoning advantages of accuracy, redefined and rewarded for exploitation, especially if secretly held. The advantage was mostly in the secrecy from competitors and victims. When later disseminated, the result rather now favors equalization. Beyond past agendas, the maps fully contain countless measurements laid down and thousands of focused positions recorded by a variety of authors, widely separated from the authorities in motive, time, distance, language, and separated in talent. Maps can now be interrogated. The digital ability to count and read large samples can settle most disputes. The analysis of raw data can hold spatial patterns. Recognition requires display. Verification requires comparison. While always capable of both insight and deception, cartography now implicitly stands on a multitude of disciplinary platforms to test and measure all the aspects of physical, historical, archaeological, economic, social, and cultural paths into our present lives. These sequences take history into a kinesthetic experience, tracking along avenues where users match symbols and make measurements as an intense form of focus. Such activity refreshes history and gains social justice by verifying or challenging a degree of reality and building discourses on how events came to be or be changed. With full access to sort through certain historical deceptions, anyone with a pan and zoom hotspot can now take the full measure of a space, noting the vast register of time, distance, positions, angles, contours, toponyms previously unknown in local classrooms. These kinetics, expansive and repetitive, distinguish spatial activities from other learning methods. Viewers engage both inside the representation and outside the representation and enveloped within it. Doubts then can be corrective or dismissive. If unresolved, they can lead to erasure. The old maps do have distortions at Aquilunda and Pungo Burnt Rocks. Although imprecise, it does summon us to see those places as existent rather than mythic, even if they're imprecise. Here, an approximation can bring some order to the many scrambled word games. Moreover, when locating the firm accuracy of Fort Masangano within 0.1 degrees, standing there as the inland headquarters, processing up to 50,000 plus or minus 20 slaves there in 1619. Indeed, global teachers are now in reach. There are 3 specific machine learning technologies. These can connect the internal and the exterior, the past and the future. First is precise oculometry, can map the intensity of thought revealed in eye movements, measuring and tracking each millisecond of time spent at exact spots on a screenscape. What is salient, what is ignored, what is learned, or what is reinforced. Finally, laser GIS, or geographic information systems, can turn a list into a plot to disambiguate all the variations in name, time, and position as it pins and layers the vital game of matching. And our focus now in the future is this middle piece, optical character recognition, OCR. Can learn and find a mass of fonts scattered in all directions on a broad cache of digital sheets. We think that combining the computer programming of OCR as a form of IA can uncover thousands of lost African names, laying them to the surface as a silver platter for any academic to find the name, see the name, and explain what it meant after being lost in scattered maps for 400 years. Finally, large language models with Monte Carlo machine simulation can run infinite. I mean specifically 1 million iterations to calculate an increasingly accurate probability of finding meaning for untold thousands of African places. In summary, a proof of concept becomes a call to action. Digital humanities can activate eye movements, register experiences, collaborate disciplines, and finally achieve outcomes that reach all the way from aptitude to attitude, marking a meaningful path that thoroughly embodies Africa. So I leave us with Walter Rodney's presence here with us. Serious people can engage in serious debate. So you can open to questions about either the history or the technology and how we all live with both.